Wealth inequality. Every economic collapse in history started long before anyone noticed. It doesn't begin with a crash or a headline. It begins here, quietly. Wealth inequality is the slow widening of the gap between the richest people in a society and everyone else. Wages flatten, cost of living climbs, housing prices rise, stock markets soar, and on paper, the economy looks healthy, but underneath, the middle class is sinking. People aren't earning more, they're borrowing more. Credit cards, mortgages, car loans, all just to maintain the same lifestyle their parents had without debt. Savings shrink, household debt balloons, and nobody panics because the GDP is still growing and the stock market keeps hitting record highs. But that growth isn't reaching most people. It's pooling at the top. The richest own more assets, which gain more value, which makes them richer. Everyone else works harder and falls further behind. This stage doesn't look like a crisis, it looks like normal life. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous. It can last decades before anyone connects the dots. By the time they do, the foundation is already cracked. Rising debt. Once the gap widens enough, the economy finds a workaround. It borrows. Banks start loosening lending standards. Credit becomes cheap, easy, almost reckless. Suddenly, people who couldn't afford a house can get a mortgage. People who shouldn't qualify for a loan get approved anyway. And it's not just individuals. Corporations load up on debt to fund buybacks and expansion. Governments borrow to cover spending they can't sustain through tax revenue alone. Everything inflates. Housing prices, stock valuations, consumer spending, all of it fueled by money that doesn't actually exist yet, and it feels like growth. New businesses open, markets climb, people feel wealthier because their assets are worth more on paper. But none of it is real. It's leverage dressed up as prosperity. The entire system runs on the assumption that tomorrow will be better than today, that the debt will be repaid, that the growth will continue. Remove that assumption and the whole thing buckles. This stage is where confidence replaces math. And confidence, unlike numbers, can vanish overnight. Speculation. This is where greed takes the wheel. Speculation replaces strategy. People stop investing based on value and start investing based on hype. Stocks, real estate, crypto, whatever the era's obsession is, prices disconnect from anything real. A company with no profit is suddenly worth billions. A house that sold for 200,000 last year is now listed at 500, and nobody questions it because everyone around them is getting rich. Media fuels the frenzy. Experts go on television and say, this time is different, it never is. Rational voices get drowned out by FOMO. Your neighbor flips a house, your coworker doubles his money on a stock tip, so you jump in too. Not because you understand it, but because staying out feels like losing. That's the trap. When the market stops being driven by fundamentals and starts running on emotion, it's not growing, it's inflating. And every bubble in history followed this exact pattern. Tulip mania, the dot-com crash, 2008 housing. The setup always looks like opportunity, until it doesn't. Market crash. Collapses don't start with a bang, they start with a crack. One moment everything seems fine. The next, something breaks. A major bank fails, a housing market implodes, a country defaults on its debt, a fraud gets exposed. It could be a policy change, a war, a pandemic. The specific event almost doesn't matter. What matters is what it reveals. Because the trigger isn't the cause, it's the moment the mask comes off. All that borrowed money, all that speculation, all that inflated confidence, it was holding together by a thread. The trigger just snaps it. And the thing about confidence is that it doesn't erode slowly, it collapses. One day markets are at record highs. The next, investors are scrambling for the exits. Fear spreads faster than any financial model can predict. Nobody wants to be the last one holding worthless assets. So everyone sells. Everyone panics. Everyone suddenly sees what was always there underneath. The foundation was never solid. People just stopped looking down. Banking collapse. When people stop trusting banks, money stops moving. That's when the crisis jumps from headlines to real life. It starts with fear. Depositors hear a bank is in trouble and rush to pull their savings. But here's the thing most people don't realize. Banks don't keep your money in a vault. They lend it out. That's how banking works. It's called fractional reserve lending. They hold a fraction, lend the rest. So when everyone shows up at once demanding their cash, the bank physically cannot pay. That's a bank run, and when one bank falls, trust in the others crumbles too. Lending freezes overnight. Businesses can't get loans. Payroll gets missed. Suppliers don't get paid. Credit markets seize up completely. The financial system's blood stops flowing. And suddenly it's not just Wall Street's problem. It's the small business that can't make rent, the factory that can't buy materials, the family that can't access their own savings. This is where the collapse stops being abstract and starts becoming personal. Unemployment. First the markets crash, then the pink slips come. When credit dries up, businesses can't borrow to stay afloat, so they cut costs. And the first cost to go is always people. Layoffs start in waves. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. Then entire divisions disappear overnight. But the layoffs don't just end at the people who lost their jobs. Those workers stop spending. They cancel subscriptions, skip restaurants, delay purchases. Demand drops. The businesses that depended on that spending now lose revenue too. So they cut more jobs. And the cycle feeds itself. Faster than any policy can stop it. Skilled workers take lower paying positions just to survive, pushing less skilled workers out entirely. College graduates stock shelves, engineers drive cabs, entire industries that took decades to build collapse in months. And the worst part is the math. Every job lost pulls money out of the economy, which kills more jobs, which pulls more money out. It's a spiral, and once it starts, stopping it feels like trying to catch falling dominoes. Government rescue. This is where governments try to stop the bleeding. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they make it worse. Central banks slash interest rates to make borrowing cheap again. They print money. They inject liquidity into the system like a defibrillator on a flatlined economy. Governments roll out stimulus packages, unemployment benefits, emergency spending. Bailouts go to the biggest banks and corporations first, and that's where it gets ugly. Because the debate is always the same. Save the banks or save the people. And almost every time, the banks come first. The logic is that if the banks collapse, everything collapses. So taxpayer money flows upward to institutions that gambled and lost. And the people who played it safe, who saved, who did everything right, they watch from the bottom. Bailouts also create a dangerous lesson. If you're big enough, you can take reckless risks because the government will catch you. That's moral hazard. Some interventions work. The post-2008 recovery eventually stabilized. Others backfire catastrophically. Weimar Germany printed its way into hyperinflation. Zimbabwe did the same. The line between rescue and ruin is thinner than most people think. Inflation. When the money itself stops being trusted, that's a different level of collapse. This happens when governments print too much currency to cover debts, fund bailouts, or keep the economy breathing. At first, prices rise slowly. Groceries cost a little more. Gas creeps up. People grumble, but adjust. Then inflation accelerates. What cost $10 last month costs $15 now, then $20, then $50. That's hyperinflation. Your savings don't shrink, they evaporate. The paycheck you earned on Monday is worth less by Friday. People stop holding cash entirely. They rush to spend it the moment they get it because waiting means losing value. Businesses can't price their products. Contracts become meaningless. International trade collapses because nobody outside the country wants your currency either. People turn to foreign money, gold, barter, anything that holds value. In Weimar Germany, people burned banknotes for heat because the paper was worth more as fuel. In Venezuela, people weighed cash instead of counting it. A wheelbarrow of bills couldn't buy bread. This stage turns money from a tool into a joke, and once trust in currency dies, rebuilding it takes generations. Social breakdown. Economic collapse doesn't stay economic. It becomes personal. When people can't feed their families, when savings vanish and jobs disappear, society starts to fracture. Crime rises. Not because people become evil, but because desperation rewrites priorities. Theft increases, black markets explode, trust in institutions evaporates because the government that was supposed to protect you just bailed out the people who caused the mess. Political extremism surges. People look for someone to blame, and politicians are happy to point fingers. Populists rise, scapegoats are chosen. Division becomes the default. Communities that held together for decades split along class, ethnic, and political lines. The educated and the wealthy leave. Brain drain hollows out the country's future. Doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, they take their skills and their capital somewhere stable. What's left behind is poverty, anger, and a generation that lost everything before they had a chance to build it. This is where economic failure becomes human suffering. Numbers on a screen become empty. Shelves, cold homes, and broken families. Economic recovery. Some economies come back, some never do. Recovery depends on a few things: strong institutions, political stability, international support, countries with rule of law, diversified economies, and functioning governments can rebuild. It takes years, sometimes decades, but the pieces eventually come back together. Confidence returns, investment trickles in, people start spending again, but not every country gets that chance. Some get trapped in cycles. Debt leads to instability, instability leads to collapse, collapse leads to more debt. The loop repeats. Argentina has been through it multiple times. So has Lebanon. The scars last longer than any recovery. A generation loses its savings. Trust in the system doesn't come back easily. Young people who grew up watching their parents lose everything approach money, government, and the future with a fundamentally different mindset. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Every recovery plants the seeds for the next collapse. Regulations loosen, memory fades, risk creeps back in. People start saying this time is different again, and the whole cycle quietly resets.